This is a guide on how to do prompting for writing with Chat GPT. So Chat GPT's come a long ways. It does a lot better job of keeping track of the conversation and keeping up with larger prompts, which helps a lot with writing. But the main thing here is how to prompt. Like, what is the prompt engineering for writing? So one of the examples is if you're trying to write, there's a lot of different ways we can go with this topic, but say you're trying to write something. If you're trouble thinking of what to think of, first thing is, like, say you think of a topic. Let's just say beekeeping, okay? If we want to write like a full-length article, ideally we want to write something big, like, 1,000 words, 2,000 words, 3,000 words. If you want a small one, it's easy, but, bigger one is more ideal, especially if you're doing like search engine stuff. But we can let Chat GPT help us with it. So we can be like, what are 5 major topics for beekeeping? And we'll let ChatGPT tell us what the overarching themes are that we can use inside of an article about beekeeping. So we have hive management, bee biology and behavior, colony health, disease management, pollination and bee-friendly practices, honey producing, processing. Sure, whatever, that's fine. I mean, on it, you can sit here and try different ways to kind of word that in order to get different results. But let's just go with this. So now the question is, how can we get ChatGPT to write an article? Because if you ever use ChatGPT, it always wants to cap an article with an introduction and a conclusion. It always wants to end it with all sunflowers and daisies and happiness over, sunset or something in the conclusion. So we don't want that. Now, one way is just to have it do this in parts and just cut out those paragraphs manually. That's one way to do it. We can also tell it to not do the conclusion, but it pretty much no matter what does it anyway. But there's a lot of different ways that we can go about doing this. So depending on the size of the article, you'll want to tell ChatGPT how big each part's going to be. And we're going to do it part by part, and then we have to add it together later in like WordPad or Microsoft Word or something like that, ideally, which is not very much work considering how much writing this does for us. So we can say something along the lines of, write part 1 of an article about beekeeping, but don't mention anything in the writing about this being part 1 of anything. So just like that helps to make sure it doesn't say part 1 this, part 1 this is part 1 of something. You don't want it to say that because you're trying to put this all into a single article later on. Okay, so after you try to prompt it that this is only part 1 and we don't want to say part 1 inside of anything, then we're going to say something, okay, part 1 of the article about beekeeping, but don't mention anything about being part 1. Now we can say something along the lines of, for this part of the article, focus primarily on hive management. So we've already declared to ChatGPT that this is about beekeeping. So now for this part, we want to focus on what is said, which was hive management. Now we can try to, get rid of the first and last paragraphs for us, but it's hard to get away to get it to actually work. So you can be like, don't write a conclusion paragraph, just stop abruptly. You could try things like this, different variations, but it generally doesn't want to listen. It almost always will try to finish with a conclusion paragraph, which is not really a big deal because you can just delete that paragraph yourself. You can always stop one paragraph short, and it's usually pretty good. So we put something like that in, and now it'll write, whatever article is always going to have like an introduction one, and then it's going to explain stuff. And something we could have done there that I didn't do is I could have also declared the length right there. It's just something really important. So by default now, it's going to slap us together some really long one here. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so it didn't quite understand this. It just, we still have to omit the last paragraph because it literally starts abruptly stopping here, which is fine. I don't know. That's one way to guarantee that this is going to be like a giant, like just cliff right here where it just would stop abruptly, and that's all we really want. So now what we'll do is we can just copy our prompt and then put it in here and say, now we just want to write part 2 of an article about beekeeping, and for this one we want to focus primarily on the second part, which was bee biology and behavior. Now you don't have to go with this. This was just to think for us. If you have your own like major parts to an article that you want, like chapters, so to speak, then you can do your own, obviously. All right, so just stop abruptly. So we can also try to add in here a length. So we can say for this part of the article, write, say, 4 paragraphs. and get rid of the comment, and focus primarily on bee biology, whatever. Don't forget, I could just stop abruptly. All right, now we can try that. And ChatGPT used to be really bad with listening to instructions on length. It's gotten a lot better. We'll see if it does it exactly what I said here. But in the past, you'd be like, all right, write 4 paragraphs, and it would just write 2, or write 10, and it would write like 6. It was kind of erratic like that. I had to skip ahead because of a networking error, but here we go. And again, like I said, it doesn't really kind of listen. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, 5 if we get rid of the last one, and then 4 if we get rid of the first and last one. So, it at least helps narrow it down so it doesn't go for like a 10 paragraph thing or a 2 paragraph thing. So if you have a range, just try to tell it what you want and hope that it gives you roughly that much, but it's not always going to be exact. So there's always going to be a little bit of work on our part to, put parts together and to, ideally, if you have time, you want to actually read it and make sure you're not repeating things, which is something you can try to do. And again, the results are not always super consistent, but you can get creative with prompt engineering for writing. And you could then say for this next part, something I could have done the whole time, that it may listen to, it may not. But it's more about increasing the odds of it doing what you want, because it's hard to explain, but the temperature is by default very high. So there's a lot of wide ranges of ways it can respond. So even if you give it the exact same prompt, it could totally listen one time, the other time it could barely listen. So it's more about getting to where most of the time you get what you want, and that's about as good as you can go for. So let's say this time we're gonna want, I don't know, we're writing a freaking thesis here, right? We're gonna go for like 6 paragraphs on the third part. So the next part is gonna be, we're gonna go back up and we're gonna do colony health and disease management. So let's grab that, and we're going to focus primarily on colony health and disease management. Now what we can do here, and this is something with prompt engineering in general, like you can just explain it in I don't know how to explain it, like a logic way. So same way you can almost explain it to a person. So at the end of all this now, so let's add another engineering prompt here too. I add engineering method to this. So we can put an also statement here, also do something else. And now also what we want is do not mention any of the topics, or I don't know what else, like any of the topics or general ideas that you've already mentioned about beekeeping in part 1 or 2 of your responses in this conversation. Okay, so it should know like what this conversation is, especially on Chat GPT 4. I think I'm on 3.5. I just have the default here. Once you get a 4, it'll be even better at this kind of stuff. But yeah, so make an also statement, just tack that on, so it'll do that, and then also do something else. And then, like I said, do not mention. We're gonna try to get it so that it doesn't. This will save us proofreading later, so we don't have to go back through and then be like, all right, vital aspect of bee behavior is allowing individuals to coordinate their actions effectively. And it may end up with like saying that exact same thing somewhere else, like all 3 times. So saying something like this will decrease the odds that happens, which will save you work later if you proofread it and want to keep yourself from repeating. Or depending on what you're doing, you may just say, I don't care if I'm repeating, and you just need to slap it together and ship it out and don't really care. I mean, it depends on what you're doing this for. But all right, so we're going to put that in, and then we're going to see how well it listens to that prompt. So this time I told it to write 6 paragraphs. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. If we delete the last one, then we'll have 6. So it was close enough. And I kind of skimmed roughly, and at least for this one, none of this are topics that were in the previous one. So I do feel like that also statement at the end did help it to be much more unique compared to the last ones, but maybe it would have done it anyway. But that things like this, you can put things like this when making your prompts in order to more narrowly, or in order to not really narrow, but like in order to decrease the odds of just, repetitive content that you have to like cut out or, figure out. Well, let's start with another new chat here. So when you do a new chat, it will, get rid of the message history, so it's not going to reference things, which is usually good when you're going to start a brand new topic, because if you go too long with the same topic and then suddenly talk about something else, there's a chance that it will want to, insert beekeeping stuff somehow, or somehow it can have an effect. Not always the case, but I've had stuff like that happen before. So especially start a brand new chat when you want to go for a hard topics, change. So let's talk about some other ways that we can use writing. So that was one way we can prompt for writing. But another thing, so like I'm picking a random topic here. I know this channel is mainly about gaming, so let's just pick a video game. So there's Stardew Valley. If you know what Stardew Valley is, like a farming simulator game made by an indie developer and stuff like that. So another way you can go about this is we can just give it a big prompt, let it write a whole article, and be done with it. You know, we can go for something like that, especially for smaller articles. And so then we can just kind of, in a human way, tell it what we want, and it will write a pretty professional article for us. Now, if you don't know enough about the topic at hand, you might want to use Chat GPT to teach you about the topic so that you know what to tell it to write about, which I'm not going to do, but if I did, I would say something like, what are 10 major game elements from the video game, quote, Stardew Valley. Quotes just give it a better, capitalization is weird, but the quotes give it a better chance to understand what exact game I'm talking about. And if you're using ChatGPT, you can't do it without games that just came out because the data set's always like a year or two old. So this only works for video games specifically for things that are at least 2 years old, which Stardew Valley is much older than that. So I could say that, and it would tell me a lot of different game elements, stuff like that. But I already know about that game, so I don't really need to do that. So something I can do here, and something I want to say about this is it's always better to, try to like close ChatGPT into a range of things it can do, but still give it creative freedom. If you try too hard to get an exact type of response, you might be disappointed because the temperature setting is pretty high by default on ChatGPT. So the randomness is always going to be there. So it's better to try to confine it to a certain set of randomness and then just be happy with the results, or try the generation multiple times. Depending on how much time you have and what you're trying to do, you could generate it multiple times and then, cut it all together yourself however you want. It just depends on what your purpose is here. So I can say something about like, write me, and here's what right about. I'm going to try to declare the length here. So let's try something big, right? Let's say, write me, okay, actually, we'll do it this way. In 20 paragraphs, I don't know if it'll do this big. It usually doesn't like doing really big things, but sometimes when you say 20, it'll give you 10 or 12, which is still pretty big. You may say like 30. It kind of has like fall off. In 20 paragraphs, write an article about Stardew Valley. So we'll start with what the overarching topic is of what we want, the overarching job. Then after that, we can get into more specific stuff. So we can say something along the lines of, in the first 2 to 3 paragraphs, explain a quick synopsis of the game as a whole. For paragraphs we'll leave it kind of vague. So for the next 2 paragraphs, explain, or maybe we can say something like, write about the different farm types in the game, how they affect. Is it effect or affect? I can't think right now. It's affect. It's affect. Okay. So we type in the game how they affect gameplay, and what are some of the basic elements of making money on the farm. And I realize this might be next. We'll say for the next 2 or 3 paragraphs here, because this whole thing, it's not going to confine it to 20 paragraphs. It may, whatever. It may go for some random stuff. So we'll just, say 2 or 3, and let it do whatever it's going to do. And then we'll say, then after that, for the following 2 or 3 paragraphs, write about the town in Stardew Valley. Talk about the non-player characters in the town, and include some information about dating and marriage as it relates to Stardew Valley. Ooh, that's a rough one to say, because that can actually get really confusing in ChatGPT. So let's try it a different way. Include some information about the dating and marriage systems inside of Stardew Valley. Otherwise, there's a chance that if I didn't do it that way, the other way there would have been a chance that it would have been like talking about marriage and comparing how Stardew Valley is some kind of analogy of marriage or something. I don't want that. And then you can just keep going. You'd be like, all right, and then follow. Okay, after those top paragraphs, write another 2 or 3 paragraphs about, and we'll say, the caves and mining systems in Stardew Valley. Then after that, let's put a period. After those paragraphs, continue on with another 2 or 3 paragraphs about fishing and quests in the game. And then we'll just say finally, see what it does if we throw a finally. I don't know if I'm not even adding this up if this is 20. It's probably not even 20. So we'll say finally, finish off with a lengthy explanation of how to beat the game, the quests involved, what makes the game fun, and and what the most interesting parts of the game are. All right. So we'll go with something like this. This is a big gamble to do something so complex, but you can try something like this. And if you're lucky, it will give you something along the lines of what we're hoping it'll give you. Something actually really good in a single go. So here's what I was talking about. We put 20 paragraphs, 2 to 3, 2 to 3, 2 to 3, and it came out as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And it did a pretty good job of explaining it, but it didn't make it as long as I was hoping. But that's why we always go for longer instead of shorter. We say give us 20, and then say everything's going to be 2 or 3. Some will be 2, some will be 0, or not 0, but some will be 1 paragraph. But that's a good way to get it. Now, we can try to get it to do it again. So we can say something like rewrite that response, but increase it in, let's say double, because I doubt it'll even double it, but double the length of the response while giving more information and detail. And we'll see if we can get lucky and get it to expand it some. So doing that gave us 8 paragraphs instead of 9, but it made them super giant paragraphs. So what we're going to try to do here is say something like rewrite that response, keep it the same length, or make it even longer, but I don't want to say make the paragraph shorter, because that's going to want to bait it into making the whole thing shorter. So we're going to say something like, but split the paragraphs in half because the individual paragraphs are too big in that response. And we'll try our luck on something like that. And that prompt worked surprisingly well. I mean, I was a little sketchy on thinking maybe, because I'm just telling it to like cut them in half. Sometimes it'll give you results where it just wants to shorten the whole thing, make it short again. But doing this multi-step process here, we actually came out with something really magnificent here. So this thing is now 18 paragraphs long, which is kind of more of what we wanted in the beginning, which is hard to get in the first, in a single prompt. It's very hard to get it to actually do that. But with the combination of the prompts, so like recap here, we gave this complicated one. It didn't make it long enough. We told it to make it longer, give us more information and detail. Then it made it longer, but made the paragraphs gigantic. So then we told it to keep it the same length or make it even longer and split the paragraphs and just tell it why. Tell it those individual paragraphs are too big. So it knows, like, try to narrow down. So you're saying, like, split the paragraphs. But we don't want it to literally just take this and cut it in half. We want to narrow that down to say the individual paragraphs are too big. So it doesn't just want to cut them in half. It knows then that we're saying the reason is that these are too big, and then that will more likely guide it into kind of rewriting them instead of just hard cutting them in half, which it kind of would tend to do anyway, but that helps to, increase the odds. All you're doing is increase odds. And then after that, it's a beautiful thing where, like, I haven't really read, I just skimmed very lightly, but just the way it looks, because, like, when you look at the first one, all these paragraphs are the exact same length, like, just about. I mean, look, they literally are all, like, the same size just about, like, really close. And so once we did this third step, it actually split up where we have a normal sized paragraph, a small paragraph, a big paragraph, a medium sized one, a slightly smaller one, 2 slightly smaller ones, and then a medium sized one, a medium sized one, a medium sized one, a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, like more normal. That's how like an actual human being would write. You have some paragraphs that are just 2 sentences. you have some paragraphs, or in this case, I think is one sentence. Well, it's kind of strange. But, you know, you have small ones, 1 or 2 sentences. Some are like 3 or 4 sentences. And that's kind of more a normal way to write. So the end result was really good. Like I said, I skimmed it, and it sounded good enough for me. If you were doing this and taking it very seriously and not just copy-pasting content, you would then want to proofread it, obviously, and make sure that it actually makes sense. Just confirm that before you go through with it. But, yeah, just standalone here, what it spit out is really good. So you can just use this for any writing style or any writing techniques, just whatever topic that you're working with. Just, you know, you can use some of these guidelines and different prompt methods that I've showed you in this video in order to get pretty consistent results, in order to get, you know, longer writings, or longer stories, stuff like that. There's other things, too, that I may cover in other videos. Like we can do things where we can, like, get Chat GPT to speak from the perspective of a character or something like that. There's all sorts of other things we can do, but I feel like this video is probably dragged on pretty long here, me explaining all the little details of how to do this. But yeah, so that's it, guys. I hope this helped you out. Now you have a slightly better idea of how to do prompt engineering in order to write articles in a more effective way to get better, more, you know, organic articles that are much longer in length in Chat GPT.